We're going to speak about a scenario that we all know too well, which is the existential crisis of public interest journalism. We have governments everywhere defunding public media. We have the business models suffering with the internet, and now with AI capturing the value generated by journalism. And this is everywhere. It's in Canada, it's in the US, it's in Brazil, it's in Europe. But we're lucky because we have two amazing women here who are going to solve all these problems for us.
No, Emily is going to.
I'm a journalist and academic. We didn't solve anything. We describe what the rest of you have to solve. But.
So, Emily, we have media capture by Trump allies, CBS, also platforms like X, now probably TikTok, maybe CNN is also going to be controlled by Trump allies. What is the importance? I mean, what does that change in the quality of news that the public is going to be getting? And why is it important to have government funding public media or a healthy public media?
I mean, so the difficult ones first. So for anyone who hasn't been paying attention, and honestly, there's so much happening, I don't blame anyone who hasn't. But the consolidation just recently in the US has taken place in two aspects, one of which is a kind of an oath of loyalty from the technology companies. We've all seen them at dinner at the White House. And the second one is in media ownership, where Brendan Carr, who heads the FCC, which should really be the barrier to mass consolidation, has declared himself to be friendly to the idea of consolidation and indeed the practice of it. We had CBS settling, I think, what might be called a nonsense lawsuit with Donald Trump for $60 million to clear the way for a Paramount Skydance merger. Just recently, you may have read that there was a small purchase, $150 million of the Free Press, which is a independent, right-leaning media outlet run by Barry Weiss. Barry Weiss has been installed as the head of news at CBS. Hope you're all following. David Ellison, who is the son of the founder of Oracle, Larry Ellison, runs the media shop. Larry Ellison and Oracle are an absolutely key part of cloud infrastructure in the US. There's now a suggestion that this large conglomerate of media assets will now take over Warner Brothers Discovery, which means that Barry Weiss will be Mark Thompson's boss at CNN if that happens, which for somebody like me who spent a long time at The Guardian covering media policy is kind of mind-blowing. And how does that concentration change things? Well, so first of all, you've got a government that's removed small funding for public media in the States, but it's clear that actually, kind of Paul Starr, the American sociologist, said you have constitutive moments in any kind of life of a country where you can make big choices about what you want everything to look like. And public media came out of a series of those choices made in like 1922, then 1946, 47. I think that actually the Trump government has made that choice around media and said it is really important to have vertical integration and loyalty. So, question, is this what new public media looks like under a particular type of regime? Because I haven't even got to the part where you now have the Chinese government and friends of the Trump administration joining to own or control TikTok within the United States. So we're sort of beginning to see, if anyone remembers the Robin Sloan film Google's On, which was like a fantasy in sort of 2005 about a dystopian future where Google and Amazon would merge and the New York Times would go offline and be a subscription-only newsletter for the elderly. It's kind of happening, but in a much worse way, I think, than any of us thought. So I think at the moment, America was so in love with the idea of the First Amendment, media plurality. We don't have media policy in the States, I used to hear when I first got there 15 years ago. We don't need it. We have the First Amendment. We have the market. We have the FCC. all of that feels like it's kind of gone now. What does that mean for free provision of news? I think that's under enormous threat, not just through this consolidation and capture, but also just through all the things that we've been talking about here, which is the ungoverned nature of AI. Will that do for a start?
Yes, very optimistic start.
Well, it's, you know, it is what it is.
It is what it is, yes.
Catherine, you've also been saying, I mean, of course, we all have been observing in several countries the way government has been defunding public media, and it is a problem. But you have also pointed out that there's a problem with reaching audiences and younger audiences by public media. What do you think needs to change in public media from your experience, you know, to reach these audiences?
It's nice to be called the former CEO, but I would like to say that currently I work as an advisor to an organization that Maria knows very well, Emily as well, called New Public in the United States, that is actually dedicated and focusing its energies on how to create new online spaces for public discourse. How do we create the parks and the libraries of the early 20th century online, where people can enjoy and participate in a civic way in a digital space, which is not possible today. So I think, first of all, if I talk about public interest media, I say we cannot deny the exodus of audience from traditional linear television and radio. And the infrastructure of most public media, government-funded organizations, is dedicated to that infrastructure, which is costly to maintain, especially in a country like Canada, where you're operating 573 transmission towers across this vast country, which are essential at times of emergency, whether that's war or wildfires or floods or, you know, a mass serial killer situation, which we had in Nova Scotia some years ago. So I'm not saying dismantle, especially radio, but there has to, if governments and the public are not willing to increase funding to public media, then they must figure out a way to transfer those assets. And I think there's going to be an opportunity at the BBC as they revisit their charter. How do you reach young audiences today? Where are they? And so the work that's been done by Reuters and the Google News Initiative shows very clearly that young people are mostly consuming their news on social. They've abandoned traditional platforms pretty well entirely. And it's not to say they don't consume news. They're consuming news differently. They're interested in news that is more relevant to them. They want explainers. That's one. Taking a CBC example, the reason Andrew Chang's About That program is so popular, it's mostly consumed on YouTube, and it explains the news. It explains what's behind the story. Young people want to go deeper. It's not this idea that they're all just surfing is not true. They want to go deeper, and they want a relationship with the journalist that's imparting the knowledge. They want expertise, and they want to know how news can be actionable. There's a wonderful newsfluencer in New York. I really urge you to look up Pigeon Post. And they basically are a stand-up comedian with a solid journalistic J-school background, delivering the news in an extremely compelling way, always with a call to action. So I think we have to rethink our standards around journalism. It's not to say take away the notion of transparency and fact-based and non-biased and non-affiliated, but go deep with your audience. And that's part of the work that we're doing at New Public, trying to work at the local level to work with what we are calling steward-led journalism. So coupling a journalist with somebody that can support community engagement and really seeing how you can build a better relationship, a deeper relationship with these younger audiences that have really left most of the traditional media. That's just kind of a start.
Emily, there's a discussion. Some people don't think so, but some people, I mean, I understand you see a role for government in helping fund public interest media.
Well, Well,
or you don't?
Well, so there's a role for some government in funding public interest media, but it's we're facing a really big moment, I think, for the governments that are interested in preserving democracy where journalism plays a role. And I think there are governments who are not very interested in that, and we all know who they are. I'm not a citizen of the United States. I'm not going to say who they are, but I think we can guess. But if you look at my country, the UK, or you look at Canada, and you've got Mark Carney here now, I think that what's very depressing about the UK at the moment is that you have a government that should be fundamentally rethinking the leading public service media organisation in the world, which is the BBC. And instead, it's in a defensive crouch, and it is thinking about how it can cut, and how to position itself for the possible incoming of reform, which is really a much further right version than we've had. And I think this idea that, something like the BBC, which is such a national institution and it's such a part of the culture, there were no votes at one time in dismantling the BBC. I'm not sure that that's true anymore, just because of the kind of propaganda campaign that you've had running in the UK, rather like the same campaigns that we've had in the US. So what's disappointing, I think, is that you don't have from the Labour government really creative thinking about how to address all of these problems with a new type of, a new deal for public interest media. And, it used to be the spectrum. Should it now be compute? This is a great idea from, my friend Bill Thompson, who works at the BBC. Just like, how do you think about the things that you can free up or subsidize? How do you make it sustainable for young journalists to live in and report on the communities that they are from? That is infrastructure. And we can see, we've seen efforts in that, but I think you have to have this twin track, which is supporting and growing journalistic interest in young people, and to be journalists outside the main metropolitan centres. And then you have to have an infrastructure plan which is very much kind of focused on saying, if we have everything in the hands of enclosed companies which are answering to the US government, we can't really have public media in the way that we would want it. And Alexandra Geese's point yesterday was brilliant, which is you can have all the regulation in the world. If you don't have enforcement, you don't have action, Maria's point, you don't have anything. So it sounds easy, but I think the fact that we have governments who can do that right now and they're not acting fast enough is really troubling. I think it should be top of their agenda.
Add something?
I would just, having spent the last day and a half with these extremely brilliant, thoughtful people, I was reminded, this summer I was in France, and I'm sitting in one of those restaurants where you're very close to your neighbor. And the man sitting next to me was a mushroom specialist, expert. And he learned that I was Canadian.
He was a fun guy.
A fun guy. That's great. And he, she's brilliant. And he, when he found out that I was Canadian, he said, "Oh, I've just been to British Columbia, where there's a very rare morel mushroom that grows only from the roots of the burnt forest. And it waits for 50 years. It has its roots embedded in the roots of trees. And when there's a wildfire, it appears. And all the mushroom fungi go and gather the mushrooms." And so I thought about that, all the conversation we're having, and Maria's inspiring words. There is an opportunity in this, and I don't want to sound like Pollyanna-ish, but I think there's an enormous opportunity right now to be the morels that grow from the roots of the scorched earth. We are, I used to say at CBC, Radio-Canada, local is our superpower. And we don't double down enough on that. I would be willing to give up some of the linear services of a public media entity like the BBC, like ZDF, in order to go deeper locally and in order to do the exploration that Emily is talking about, the creator-influencer economy in 2025 has surpassed the traditional media industry in terms of economic value. So I say, what can we as news professionals learn from creators and influencers, apart from applying makeup better?
Or any makeup in my case. I don't aspire to be an influencer, so that's fine.
But
yes.
the reality is that the influencer connects with their audience in an authentic way, that terrible word, authentic way. They are experts, they go deep, and if they screw up, if they apply something that doesn't work, they hear from it. And so I do believe that journalists and journalism can learn from that creator-influencer. Again, not to become entertainment vehicles, but to respect that we're in a dialogue, not a monologue. And if you've been to J School, and all of the journalists that I have encountered in my career do feel at some level that they have a moral obligation, as their role to hold truth to power, but then to tell the public, but not necessarily to hear what the public has to say about that.
I mean, yeah, so I think also that I completely agree with all of that. I think also there's a thing which has happened over the past 25 years which is not entirely negative, which is, as we've seen organisations shrink away from investing in journalism. My professional career was spent at The Guardian, where I was first of all a reporter, then an editor, then I ran their digital outlet for 10 years or so, when we grew from like 1 million users to sort of 100 million or whatever. But the way in which sort of competition in the market is talked about is our biggest problem, which is, one of, I think, the things that has happened. First of all, you have a genuine public interest non-profit sector in the United States, which you simply didn't have 15 years ago. And that is proof of that's the mushroom theory sort of coming true. But also, I remember going to the BBC in like 2005, 2006 with a bunch of really brilliant technologists and talking to their brilliant technologists about the iPlayer and saying, can we create between us, British Museum, The Guardian, the BBC, like a platform for public interest? And the BBC were like, ooh, really interesting idea.
No.
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 No, can't do that. And the kind of where even the public service media, we're not the lens. Journalism is not the lens through which the world of events is now viewed. It's been set to one side. You can choose to look through that lens, but we're not the lens. So we have to recognize people like ourselves with certain standards, and this goes for the influencers, I think, as well, because I spent some time talking to V. Spear from Under the Desk News, who I just bumped into in Perugia. It's a sort of really fascinating 45 minutes, and what's clear is that she spends as much time thinking about the ethics of what you put out as anybody in any newsroom, and you find people who are like each other and organizations. And that's where I think you need to do this, as Maria was talking about the matrix, but where you share kind of like standards and you share kind of networks. You can do investigations globally now, which we didn't do 20 years ago, through many different organizations. We have to do that, I think, with in how we cope with and think about AI, how we think about our journalism, how we think about distributing it. It's about a kind of a world of alliances, public interest alliances, and it'd be really lovely to have some money to actually help all of that happen as well, I think.
That would be good.
It's interesting, I spoke with Nishant Lalwani, the president of the Public Interest Media Fund, and he actually said that the ideal thing would be to combine the reach of the influencers, the audience, and a journalistic process. Do you think that's possible? And are there people who can do that?
I mean, yeah, like news actually and journalists still have huge reach. I mean, I think we're kind of like in danger of writing these people off a bit. We saw that actually, he's not a journalist, but you see sort of Jimmy Kimmel was a really important inflection point in American media, I think, which was the first real resistance. I mean, I work for Columbia University, and I've signed a contract which says I don't say anything negative about my employer, but you've seen that actually you can which I'm not going to because it's a great place to work, which is, but you can, it really is. And the journalism school is a really great place to work because we are not, anyway. But Jimmy Kimmel was actually a really important line of resistance. And so there is something about combining that reach. The worry that I have comes from this idea that fairly soon every free message that reaches you will either be underwritten or overwritten by commercial messaging or political messaging, but you won't necessarily know. And I think that's the thing that we have to crack.
And just as a corollary thought, the reality is, to the point of reach, the public broadcasters, US aside, because that's a very particularly wounded case. But if you look at Germany's ZDF and ARD, or Radio France, France Télévisions, or CBC Radio-Canada, or of course the BBC, that not only has reach within its own country, but has worldwide reach, which is an extremely important factor. If you combine all of those public broadcasts, you're talking billion of people. Like, it's not nothing. And so if we could educate the governments that are funding these organizations to be more willing to modernize and transform their mandates and move away from serving, I hate to say it, the very vocal voters that are 65 years old plus. And that's why they get stuck having to deliver services that are not relevant to the next generation or even the 45-year-olds. I mean, I don't know anybody who tunes in to the TV set at 6 p.m., like nobody. And honestly, that's where a lot of the resources, not just of CBC Radio-Canada, but all of these if they could be brave to talk about courage, Maria's word about courage, the courageous thing to do would be to say, it's an existential moment. We have an opportunity to be leaders. Imagine that public media, government funded, actually taking action and shifting, not abandoning journalism, strengthening journalism, and giving, to Emily's point, there will always be journalism in these countries, and in Canada it could be the indigenous population or French language that needs special care. There will always be groups that need more and more support. But imagine if you were able to combine a superpower group that would say, okay, how do we start dealing in tech and have a tech stack that makes sense? Because right now, 90%, and I remember Mark Thompson saying, how do you reinvent the future or invent the future if you're spending 90% of your time on legacy assets? And that was when he first joined the New York Times, and he did transform that organization.
That's true, but you also do have to, so I think where the government part is really important, probably more than actually direct funding now, is this romance that they have with these incredibly, so as Dave Skok was just saying, you know, they are so completely not just enamored of the tech companies, but actually scared of them because of what they can do to their economies. So, you know, we had a deputy prime minister who went to be head of PR at Facebook. That gives you an idea of where statecraft stands versus, you know, a shitty job in a corrupt tech company, for example. I'm not saying that that was a shitty job, it's probably well paid. Rishi Sunak, who sat and simpered on stage. I don't work for the British government, so I can say what I like about them. He sat and simpered on stage with Elon Musk, has now signed a contract with Microsoft, etc. We don't have a lot of resilience among our political classes at the moment. And I can see why. I think that I think Kate Brennan from AI Now made this point in Brussels last week when she was at the Open Markets Initiative, where she said, you know, artificial intelligence has two business models. One of them is advertising, and that looks like it's not working out right now. And you need to read Gary Marcus's brilliant newsletter to find out all the ways in which it's not working out. But the other business model is government contracts. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at either of those being successful, that really screws journalism and independent media in either way. And I think that that's where we really need the Alexandras of this world, and we really need the governments who can take the opportunity, who can actually take the opportunity and say, can we peel ourselves away from this and create some wealth in our own country through our own infrastructures, etc., to do that? And I don't honestly, that's where I'm quite pessimistic, because I don't really see the quality of politician out there to do that at the moment.
And thinking about this value creation and capture, how do you see the scenario? I mean, we have the New York Times and other newspapers around the world. There's a newspaper I work for in Brazil suing OpenAI and other AI companies for copyrights, for some sort of remuneration. But maybe these companies are just going to settle, and this is not really going to change anything. I mean, what do you see changing? Are there any hopes for copyright legislation or for something that also benefits others?
Well, first of all, I hope they don't settle. I hope they litigate and take this to court, because I think big organizations need to do that.
But if you have government in the pockets, it's very, very hard. We see at the Competition Bureau here in Canada.
But it's very
hard to get this kind of stuff.
I still think you need to make the arguments in public.
Yes.
I don't know who that is, but they do rock. But yeah, sorry, I couldn't quite hear. But I do think that it's important to say that this is important in public and keep saying it's in public. I do think there's a high chance of settlement. If Amazon is prepared to sign a check for $20 million a year to the New York Times, then I think bigger checks will follow from other organizations. It's hard to know exactly. But I mean, where this is slightly different is that we at the Tao Center, which I'm director of in Columbia, we were very early in being very harsh critics of the pact between technology companies and journalism companies. This is when Taylor Owen was my research director. Now I work for him, which is a very different organisation.
No conflict of interest.
But it is the case that I think there was this belief in journalism companies that somehow these organizations, which are intrinsically not unjournalistic, but they're also kind of intrinsically anti-democratic, really were part of our future. And if anybody is left out there who really thinks that about any of the existing AI companies, then you need to read a book or something, because that's not what. And I think that actually the adversarial nature of that is healthy. It's much healthier than it was 10 years ago.
I think we ran out of time, but if you want to end on an optimistic note,
Yes,
in 3 seconds.
3 seconds. I just want to reiterate Maria's words about courage and standing up. And I do believe that the public media organizations and the public interest journalism that we have, to Emily's point, it's not, the reach is significant. It's about how we leverage that superpower at the local level to really make an impact. So let's be optimistic and keep doing the good work.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.